Well, it's a pleasure and thank you for joining us. Definitely, once again now, we'll be making sense of one of the most complex, but definitely the simplest things when it comes to the business community. My name is Fred Makowi and want to thank God finally that we are coming towards the end of year 2021. Of course, there's been a lot of challenges, but most importantly, there've also been so many opportunities. We'll be making sense. I know just of recent, 40 companies were listed for having performed better when it comes to taxation. But I also must say SEATINI, just of recent, has been given an award for what? Of course, that is what we'll be making sense for. And of course, I'm joined by Grace Namugambe. She's in charge of Programme Officer, Financing for Development here at SEATINI Uganda. We'll be discussing quite a number of issues, major looking at the link between taxation and service delivery here in Uganda. Namugambe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you don't mind, you would greet the viewers and then we get started.
Hello viewers, and I hope that this discussion will be a fruitful one and beneficial.
First of all, thank you and congratulations as SEATINI for getting this fundamental award. How did this kind of information find you?
Of course, it was very great news. It has been a very long journey of over 10 years, and SEATINI has been engaging in advancing the tax justice agenda. So for us, this recognition from URA was very great news, despite the fact that sometimes we agree to disagree on some issues within the tax administration system. So it was a great win for us, but it was also very good news, and it's not for us to stop here, but for us to keep going and make sure that we are achieving tax justice in Uganda.
Okay. And then, dear viewers, I must say this program, we are streaming it live, of course, on Facebook and Twitter. That is March 24 TV, and definitely on YouTube. Join us. Of course, feel free to agree or definitely disagree with us. Let's now make a link between taxation and service delivery. In your opinion, as a program officer, one would want to know, what is taxation?
Of course, taxation is the process by which government is collecting money, collecting revenue to pay, to provide services. And when it comes to tax and service delivery, it is best understood when we understand the link between tax and development, where we look at tax as a tool for development. And in this sense, we look at the 4 R's, where we look at revenue as one of the 4 R's, in the sense that government collects revenue in order for it to, government collects taxes in order for it to generate revenue to provide the much needed services, things like hospitals, infrastructure, education, and the likes. The next R is on redistribution, that when government collects this revenue in form of taxes, it is able to distribute it across different members within the population to see to it that everyone is benefiting. And this is when we look at tax as a tool that can also bridge the inequality gap to ensure that both the rich and the poor are gaining from the taxes being paid.
Okay.
The next is repricing, where we look at tax as a tool that is used to encourage the consumption of goods that are deemed socially desirable. In this case, government might waive taxes from goods like education materials, sanitary towels, water, to encourage people to consume them and also to ensure that they are able to access them. But it might also increase taxes on goods that are deemed socially undesirable. Things like cigarettes, alcohol, that may be thought of as harmful to health, would attract higher taxes because government is discouraging people from consuming them. Then the last one is representation. And this basically looks at the social contract between government and the citizens. And it gives citizens, and it is often, and it has often been argued that as a citizen, if you pay your taxes, it gives you a right to demand from government in terms of how the revenue should be utilized, and how it should be utilized, but also in terms of shaping the policies in place.
Okay.
What kind of policies do you want to see in place as a citizen? It gives you that right. And I think that is when we get into the link between tax and service delivery. That with all the 4 R's factored in terms of revenue, redistribution, repricing, representation, as a citizen, we have a right to step up and ask the government that I paid my taxes, I don't see good roads, we don't see good healthcare facilities, we don't see good education facilities. We need to see these.
Okay.
But also, as a government, there is need for them to equitably redistribute the revenue,
Okay.
to ensure that even the person deep down in the village is able to access good health care, access good education, because they too have paid taxes.
Okay.
Despite the fact that it might be less, they have access to this service. They have a right to access the services because of the taxes that they paid.
You seem to be suggesting that we can never separate taxation from service delivery. Is that so?
Yes. You can't separate tax from service delivery, because the main reason, ideally, for government to collect taxes is to provide the revenue for those services. To collect taxes is to provide revenue, is to generate revenue for provision of services,
Okay.
which are needed by the people.
Okay.
Because if the people are not healthy, then how much revenue are you going to collect as a government? It
Okay.
will also be limited.
So what happens, because you've put it right, that when government gets taxes from the people, it must be able to foot the bills. For instance, we're in a situation where the doctors are on strike for little pay. So do you seem to be suggesting that if government does not meet the needs of the people, the public has a right to come out and demand services from government?
Yes, exactly. As a citizen, you have a right to demand, especially in terms of how government is using the revenue. Is it responsive to your needs as a citizen? Citizens have that right.
Does government also have the role to come back in case people have failed to pay taxes? Do they also have a right in one or the other to come and demand taxes from the public?
Yes, government through the Uganda Revenue Authority comes out to demand that people pay their taxes. They put in place quite a number of compliance measures, quite a number of enforcement measures to ensure that people are actually paying taxes. And it's not just local, and it's just the Uganda Revenue Authority. Local governments have also been mandated to collect revenue in the form of fees, licenses at the subnational level. So government is able to actually come out and demand that people pay their taxes.
Okay. And of course, those joining us, we are speaking to Grace Namugambe. She's in charge of Programme Officer Financing for Development. Definitely here at SEATINI, we are still making sense of the different links between taxation and service delivery. Just of recent, URA has just issued, of course, a document displaying those 40 companies that have been compliant to. Let's now look at taxation and COVID. What do you make of these companies that the URA has actually put out?
I think the first one is when it comes to taxation and COVID, is that there is a need for government to rethink in terms of how it is collecting revenue, how it is utilizing it, and the likes. And COVID has proven or has exposed some of the weaknesses within quite a number of governments, especially when it comes to revenue mobilization, because we've seen the cost, the amounts incurred in terms of debt increasing. Even for Uganda, we've surpassed the sustainable debt ratio that stands at 50%. I think we're now at about 51%. So that shows us that as a country, we're not doing very well when it comes to domestic revenue mobilization. And given that it's a COVID situation that we are in, there is definitely a need to rethink, because it won't be business as usual. And looking at the URA targets, of course, we saw that they had been able to collect only about 1.68 trillion against a target of 1.71 trillion. And the argument has been that there's been less taxes collected from international trade and from international and domestic trade. And I think that is also partly because of the situation in which we are. Of course, there is less going on in terms of business, less transactions happening. So all that would tend to affect revenue mobilization. But we also see that over the years, government has continuously been awarding tax incentives and exemptions to a number of foreign investors, and we see less of the domestic companies benefiting from these incentives. And yet we know that government does not carry out a regular cost benefit analysis to see how much we are benefiting or how much we are losing as a country. And that is definitely one area that needs to be tapped into. And we're not saying that it is bad to give tax incentives. We are against the harmful tax incentives and exemptions where companies are benefiting from these, and as a country we don't realize any benefits.
There are those viewing us that many times ask themselves, but what could be these factors as to why many times URA does not attain its target? Yes, the president, when URA was celebrating 30 years, the president did put it right that URA is not doing its best or her best. One would want to ask, in your opinion as SEATINI, what do you think could be the factors as to why maybe Uganda Revenue Authority never attains its targets?
I think from way back, our advocacy has always centered around having everyone pay their fair share of taxes. We have a very large informal sector that does not contribute to the tax collections. We also see limited capacity in terms of staffing, but also in terms of technical capacity within URA when it comes to collection of revenue, because we have complex tax situations. We have high net worth individuals, many of whom URA, despite the fact that it has taken steps towards establishing a high net worth individuals unit, there are still many of them going on around, and they're not contributing to the tax collections. Large informal sector, high net worth individuals, the capacity within, but also the willingness of the citizens to pay their taxes. Most people are not willing to pay their taxes, and that also takes us back to what we talked about when it comes to the link between tax and service delivery. And people are not willing to pay because they're not seeing services being delivered.
Okay.
They're not provided. So there are quite a number of issues when it comes to the reasons as to why URA is failing to hit its targets. It's between both the government as well as the citizens.
But is there at any one point when Ugandans or people in any country have ever willed to pay tax? I think the habit of not paying tax seems to be a global problem. Are there a country where citizens of that nation actually want to pay taxes 100%?
I think it is. You would say that there are countries. You would say that it's a general issue that people are not willing to pay taxes. But there are countries, especially the developed countries, the more developed countries, where you see people willingly going to pay their taxes. Of course, sometimes it's because of the modern systems, where if people don't pay their taxes, then they are tracked. But We've also seen instances where citizens come out and they are really willing to pay their taxes.
Okay.
And that is because they've seen their resources being put to good use by government. When people see that there's a lot of corruption happening, when they see that they don't have access to services, because we see also a very big number of households in Uganda that spend majority of their income paying for access to social services.
Okay.
So if that is happening, then definitely you're not going to have people willing to pay their taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, but also there are challenges in terms of people knowing how to actually pay their taxes. We have very high literacy levels as a country, in that even businesses, much as they might be willing to comply sometimes, they're not able to comply because they're not aware of the process. It's a bit complicated sometimes, and I know URA has taken steps to try and do some taxpayer education, but there's still definitely more that needs to be done.
Now, in this financial year, over 15 taxes were established, and of course one of the most tax that we are talking about is the one we use on a daily basis. Most people think there are so many taxes, and others are actually saying government should waive off these taxes. But we are the same people telling government, give us the roads, pay the medical workers, foot these bills. I don't know what your take is on that subject.
I think, like I said earlier, it's about striking a balance between tax and development. So between collecting taxes and providing room for more development. And if we are to say where is the money coming from, then we also need to look into the question of how is the money being used. If we're paying so much in taxes and investing in things that don't yield immediate return, then it means we stand to keep going through a vicious cycle where you're going to keep collecting revenue, investing it in things that whose return on investment is low, but also you have to keep borrowing to fill the gap to provide now the much needed services, and you're going to see government increasingly introducing more what I would term as regressive taxes that people will always complain about and not agree to. So I think that would then get me into a discussion on how is government using the money that it collects. When you look at investment into the trade industry, tourism, agriculture, how much is government investing in those sectors? It's investing a very minimal percentage of the budget into those sectors. So for as long as government is not able to invest more in those sectors, then that means that those sectors will be producing less and less, and government cannot actually get tax from them, despite the fact that there are some people there. So it's going to continue coming up with taxes, imposing them on goods or services that would be deemed essential, and draining the same portion of the population, because we feel that most of the taxes right now are impacting more of the formal sector. There is a very big informal sector that does not contribute to the tax bracket, despite the fact that they are earning quite a lot of money.
Okay.
We see, I talked about the tax incentives and exemptions, where we see quite a number of multinational companies coming up and setting up here. They get the tax incentives and exemptions. Once the time period for the tax incentive or exemption expires, they pack up and go.
Okay.
They don't stay. But
and maybe just of recent, you may agree or disagree with me. Your concentration as SEATINI is for people to collect taxes from within. Doesn't this mean that now the burden, to a great extent, is going to shift to the Ugandans?
Our concentration as SEATINI is for fair, just equitable and accountable tax policies and practices, in the sense that everyone is contributing and paying their fair share of taxes. So I think when we emphasize that government needs to collect money from within our country, we look at, of course, issues like tax incentives and exemptions that I've talked about. We emphasize the need for government to close loopholes within the law that have often provided people an opportunity to avoid payment of their fair share of taxes, especially companies. And of course, curbing or bringing the people within the informal sector into the tax bracket. So when we say that government needs to collect revenue from within, we emphasize the need for it to do it in a fair, just and equitable way, that everyone is paying their fair share of taxes, so that you don't have to burden a smaller group to pay a huge amount of tax, while there is a group out there that's not paying any money despite the fact that they are earning. Okay.
We seem to be only speaking to URA, but we are not speaking to those even that are running out of the taxes. I think as SEATINI and civil society, we are speaking more to URA, who have actually tried to play their role, but we are not addressing these ones who are running out from the taxes. So what do we do to also put everyone on board?
We are actually engaging private sector as well, especially through associations, to encourage people or companies and businesses to appreciate the need for fair taxation, to appreciate that when they pay their taxes, of course, they stand to get some benefits. And we've seen quite a lot of that translating positively at the local government level, because we've also done quite a lot of work at the subnational level. And at that point, you see that after some of the work that we've been able to do, you see local governments collecting more revenue at that level, but you also see an increase in voluntary compliance, that more people walk into their local governments and present their receipts of payment, and at that point we've also seen increased accountability at the local government level. And for us, that is a win, because because we've been engaging with local government officials in terms of building their capacity to understand, to identify, and to collect revenue at that level, but also for them to build and enhance their systems to see to it that they're able to capture a bigger number of people into the tax, into their registers, and that they follow a cycle to see to it that they are mobilizing, they are able to sensitize people, to show them what the money is being used for, and encouraging them to pay their fair share of taxes. And when they provide accountability and improve on the service delivery, then it has proven that people are actually more willing to pay their taxes.
Maybe as we plan to draw towards the close of these interviews, of course, those joining us, we are still making sense of the link between taxation and service delivery. And then Grace Namugambe, she's in charge of Programme Officer here at SEATINI Uganda. As we plan to draw towards the close, I would want to know, what is the opportunity for citizenship to participate, especially in the taxation process?
So when it comes to taxation, it's especially the tax process, it's always between Ministry of Finance, as well as the Parliament. And if I'm to start with the subnational level, just to talk a bit about the subnational level in terms of budgeting, especially after people have paid their taxes and they have a right to demand for the services. So there are often budget conferences at the subnational level. And this is a space where citizens are able to go and talk about the issues that they need to see addressed. Okay. If they need health centers provided, if they need them equipped, this is an opportunity for them to share that with officials within their local governments, Ministry of Finance, because these conferences are held at the subnational level. When it comes to the national level, the Ministry of Finance collects proposals from the public. And this is usually between the months of August to about January.
The way it was done this time around?
Yes, collecting proposals from the citizens, from the various sectors, to understand what exactly they want to see in the tax bills of the next year. In January, those are sort of looked into by the Ministry of Finance, and those inform the tax bills which are presented to Parliament during the month of April. And often during the month of April, Parliament sends out a call for citizens to go and share their perspectives on the bills. However, the challenge is with this process and these opportunities is that they are not widely known by the citizens. Many people don't know that they can actually participate in this process, in these processes, but also the time frame provided is limited, and this is where we've often called upon government to provide a structured mechanism for citizens' engagement in tax processes, and they've often said that they are working towards doing so. It was also indicated in the recently launched domestic revenue mobilization strategy.
Okay.
So the space is there. It might not be sufficient, but it is an opportunity that we can take advantage of as citizens to see to it that the different tax policies in place are responsive to our needs as citizens.
Moving forward, what do we do as we plan towards the closure of this interview? Moving forward, what do we do? What should the country do? Even as we come towards the end of the year, 2021.
I think recapping on the last point that I talked about, that I was just talking about, there is need for government to put in place structured spaces for citizens' engagement in tax policy processes, because this is what will help citizens appreciate the need for them to pay their taxes, but also improving accountability, especially in terms of how much revenue is being mobilized and how it is being utilized, and ensuring that it is addressing the most urgent needs of the citizens. But also calling upon citizens to interest themselves in these discussions, to not stop, because there are those that stop at just paying their taxes. So people need to go beyond paying their taxes to get into that space and understand what is the money being used for, and see to it that they're able to influence and have their most urgent priorities being provided for in some of these annual budgets.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there lessons you think we've learned, or other lessons that we ought to unlearn, and there are those other areas that we should basically rethink and focus on as a country, even as we move forward?
When it comes to DRM,
yes,
there is a big need for us to invest in research, especially while generating some of these policies. It is important to understand the impact that they will be having, or that they could have on the country, on the citizens, and beyond stopping at understanding the implication before, there is need to understand the implication while these measures are being implemented. How are they impacting on the citizens? So there is that continuous need for research and analysis, especially when it comes to tax policy formulation, to understand the impact of the different tax policies that are being put in place on the people.
Grace, you should be saying your final word as we plan to sign out.
My final word is a call upon all the citizens to pay their fair share of taxes and demand for accountability.
Grace Namugambe, thank you for speaking to us and being definitely generous with your knowledge. And dear viewers, thank you for being part and parcel of this interview. I know the year 2021 has definitely been a very challenging year, but I also know that those that have picked opportunities, and of course those are some of the things that Grace Namugambe has been sharing with us. I know taxation is one of the other complex that most people fear to talk about, but I know for any country to develop, for any country to transition from one level to the other, we must collectively participate in definitely paying tax to Uganda Revenue Authority. You have also been sensitized, dear viewers, that you have the right to at one point to wake up and say, government, we have paid these taxes. What have you been able to do? I must say thank you for being part and parcel of this interview. My name is Fred Makuya and stay tuned to Smart 24 TV.